When Senator John Leguizamo publicly challenged Vice President Jonathan Roumie to a nationally televised debate, he had no idea he was orchestrating the most humiliating moment of his political life. What followed wasn't just a response, it was a reckoning. With one sentence, delivered with surgical calm, Roumie silenced an entire studio. Leguizamo blinked, his confidence cracking in real time. Within seconds, social media platforms exploded. Some called it the most devastating verbal dismantling of a sitting senator in modern memory. Others simply called it the fall of Leguizamo. It had all begun just 2 days earlier when Leguizamo had been dragged from a restricted Capitol corridor for attempting to storm a security detail and confront the Secretary of Homeland Security without clearance. "You work for us," he yelled as agents restrained him, a moment caught on camera and looped endlessly online. Stung by the fallout and desperate to reclaim his image, the senator staged what he believed would be a comeback. On live morning television, he slammed his fist on the table and stared down the camera. "If Roumie has even a shred of courage, he'll face me, man to man. Let's talk law. Let's talk leadership." America was watching. Within minutes, the phrase Leguizamo versus Roumie began trending across every platform. Analysts were divided. Some called it gutsy, most called it suicidal. Meanwhile, in a quiet office in Ohio, Vice President Roumie listened to the challenge in silence. Coffee in hand, eyes steady, no reaction, just a single nod. "Book the studio," he said softly to his staff. No anger, no ego, only intention. Behind closed doors, Roumie reviewed documents the Justice Department had just declassified. Files linking Leguizamo to suspicious donations, foreign lobbying networks, and shadowy super PACs. He didn't react. He prepared, quietly, thoroughly. Leguizamo, on the other hand, rehearsed his talking points with fire in his voice. "He's just a puppet," he sneered. "I'm going to crush this guy on live television." What Leguizamo failed to see was that this would not be a clash of politics, but of character. At 8:00 p.m., the stage was set. 2 chairs, 1 moderator, and millions of Americans watching, not just for entertainment, but for something deeper, a moment of truth. Leguizamo came in swinging. "Mr. Roumie," he spat, barely hiding his disdain, "you represent an administration built on intimidation and fear. Is this your idea of democracy?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Roumie didn't flinch, didn't blink. He waited, still as stone. "Are you finished?" he asked quietly. It was not sarcasm, not deflection. It was discipline. Leguizamo doubled down, hurling accusations, calling him spineless, a political weapon, a coward hiding behind institutions. "You silence dissent. You punish the innocent." Roumie breathed in, slow, deliberate. And when he finally spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You speak so often of punishment, Senator," Roumie began, voice quiet and level. "But weren't you recently handcuffed for breaching a secure federal West area to confront a cabinet secretary during official duties?" The words dropped like ice into the room. The air shifted. The smirk on John Leguizamo's face vanished in real time. But Roumie wasn't finished. "You wanted to discuss legal principles," he continued, tone unwavering. "Then let's address the $4.2 million funneled through your education PAC from 3 shell corporations all tied to foreign entities. Funds you received under your direct oversight while standing on podiums preaching transparency and justice." There was no anger in his delivery, no triumph, just calm clarity, cutting deeper than any shout ever could. The moderator inhaled sharply. Leguizamo's hands, previously animated and commanding, froze. Twitter servers buckled under the weight of a nation reeling. People weren't just watching a debate, they were witnessing a collapse. Leguizamo's eyes darted, searching for a foothold that no longer existed. He looked from camera to moderator, realizing in dawning horror that this wasn't the opponent he'd imagined. He thought Jonathan Roumie would be just another talking head, polite, polished, perhaps morally firm, but politically fragile. He had not prepared for this. A man who didn't fight for applause. A man who wielded truth like a scalpel. Backstage, Leguizamo's advisors whispered furiously. "How did they find the PAC ties?" one hissed. No answers came. Roumie remained still, hands gently folded. The moderator attempted to regain composure. "Senator Leguizamo, would you like to respond directly to these allegations?" Leguizamo cleared his throat. "These accusations are unfounded. Republican fabrications," he muttered, voice cracking. "A distraction tactic." But no one was distracted anymore. His signature charisma, gone. His fire, flickering. His gaze, evasive. And Roumie? He said nothing for a moment. Then deliberately, he reached into his jacket and produced a printed document. "This is your PAC's FEC filing from 6 weeks ago," he explained calmly. Page 9, line 16, Green Apps Education Initiative, a major donor. Yet this organization has no legitimate registration with the IRS, the DC Department of Records, or your own district's oversight board. Then softly but firmly, "So again, Senator, who exactly funded you?" Silence fell like a curtain. The moderator whispered something unintelligible. The screen cut to commercial. Backstage, Leguizamo stormed out, his mic still live. "This was a setup," he hissed. "He shouldn't have access to this kind of information." His staff said nothing. There was no plan left. No defense, only exposure. In the green room, Roumie sat calmly, sipping water. He declined all conversation. He didn't rehearse a victory lap. He simply waited. By the time the feed resumed, the damage had metastasized. Leguizamo looked smaller, not physically, but spiritually. His shirt clung to him. His voice trembled with every word. "This isn't about me," he insisted. "This is about policy, not personal attacks." Roumie met his words with neither anger nor sarcasm. Only that same still composure. "Senator, it was you who demanded we speak about legal principles," he replied gently. "And the foundation of law is truth. If you can't be transparent about where your money comes from, how can anyone trust where your leadership is taking them?" The audience applauded, not wildly, but with weight, with conviction. And Leguizamo, the showman, the fighter, the force of sound and fury, had no response. Across the country, the moment was already being clipped, shared, rewatched. "Are you seeing this?" Texts flew from Boston to Sacramento. Yet what truly moved viewers wasn't the revelation of corruption, but how it was revealed. No shouting, no triumph, only truth, delivered quietly and received like thunder. Across TikTok and Instagram, the moment went viral in seconds. Young content creators layered music over Roumie's words, crafting videos that felt less like political debate and more like cinematic revelation. On Reddit and political forums, the verdict was almost unanimous. This might be the most consequential political confrontation of our time. Inside the White House, President Trump watched from the Roosevelt Room. His expression was uncharacteristically still. Then with a slow nod, "That young man shows real courage under fire." Kristi Noem, the very cabinet secretary Leguizamo had tried to confront just days earlier, issued a statement. "Vice President Roumie exemplifies professionalism and grace. It's a privilege to serve alongside him." But the true aftershocks were felt in California, in cafes, living rooms, schools, and city halls. Leguizamo's constituents began whispering a new question. What else has he kept from us? One voter, previously loyal, posted, "As someone who voted for John, I now feel a deep sense of betrayal." Roumie hadn't simply won a debate. He had tapped into a buried public longing for truth over posturing, for accountability without spectacle. As the moderator turned to Leguizamo again, the tension became unbearable. "Senator, can you confirm whether these contributions were properly vetted?" Leguizamo didn't answer. He stared at his water bottle, his hand visibly shaking. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was revelatory. In that stillness, the truth hung in the air, undeniable, unspinnable. Then Roumie leaned forward, just slightly, his voice low, almost fatherly. "Truth doesn't need volume or vengeance, Senator," he said. "It only needs light." A pause, a breath, and for the first time, Leguizamo broke. "I won't take moral lectures from someone in Trump's administration," he muttered. But no applause came, no laughter, no validation, only silence. Roumie nodded slowly. "Senator, you called for this debate. You wanted to speak of law and leadership. I came prepared with documents. You arrived with only disdain." Leguizamo flushed. His voice cracked. "You don't understand what it's like. The pressure I'm under," he said, the desperation creeping into every syllable. Roumie paused, then delivered the line that would haunt the senator forever. "True pressure," he said gently, "is when your spouse looks into your eyes and asks why you've become someone your children would no longer admire." The entire studio held its breath. Across the nation, something shifted, not in politics, but in hearts. Leguizamo blinked hard. His eyes shone. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Backstage, his communication team sat in stunned silence. No spin could rescue this. Journalists flooded social media with stills. Leguizamo trembling. Leguizamo mute. Leguizamo broken. And then it got worse. A former campaign intern leaked verified footage, taken at a private Napa Valley fundraiser in 2022. In the video, Leguizamo sat with a glass of wine, laughing. Honestly, he told donors, I don't care where the money comes from, as long as it gets me reelected. The timing couldn't have been more catastrophic. The man who had once stood for the people was now exposed, not just as compromised, but as cavalier about it. The leaked fundraiser footage detonated across platforms like a bomb. Within minutes, outrage spread like wildfire. This wasn't spin, this wasn't hearsay, it was Leguizamo, caught on camera, laughing off the very integrity he had campaigned on. Back in the debate studio, an aide discreetly handed Jonathan Roumie a tablet. He glanced down, reviewed the footage, then, with quiet gravity, turned the screen toward the moderator. Would you prefer to address this, or shall I include it in our conversation? He asked softly. The moderator turned pale. Senator, can you confirm the authenticity of this video? Leguizamo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Only a subtle nod and the collapse of a political identity years in the making. Roumie didn't gloat, so he simply said, leadership means telling the truth, even when it costs you everything. That's why I came here tonight. And for the first time since the confrontation began, John Leguizamo lowered his head, not in defiance, but in surrender. 10 minutes before the scheduled end of the debate, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, Leguizamo unhooked his mic. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, I can't keep doing this. He stood up, turned away from the cameras, and walked off the stage. No farewell, no rebuttal, just silence. Gasps filled the studio. Viewers at home sat frozen. The moderator looked toward Roumie, unsure what to say, what to do, but Roumie rose slowly, smoothed his suit jacket, and addressed the nation. This moment was never about humiliating another man, he began, his voice steady and sincere. It was about reminding our country what truth looks like and what happens when we abandon it. There was no applause, only breathless stillness. And then, across the street, a voice. Truth matters. Then another. Truth matters. The chant swelled. Outside the building, Americans had begun to gather. Some held candles, others held signs. Many held one another. One elderly woman, gripping a handmade poster, turned to a reporter and said, I haven't felt this proud of anyone in government since Reagan. Inside, Roumie didn't stay for the after show. He exited through a side door, declining fanfare, interviews, or celebration. Across town, newsrooms erupted. Senate offices buzzed with confusion and crisis. Staffers whispered the word resignation before anyone even confirmed it. Yet while cameras zoomed in on chaos, Roumie kept his word. He walked quietly into Children's National Hospital for a previously scheduled visit. No cameras, no press, just a nurse stunned by what she'd seen earlier, who whispered, no matter what happens next, tonight you gave people hope again. The next morning, a Senate Ethics Committee meeting was announced. Leaked agenda items, foreign donations, shell corporations, influence peddling. But America wasn't focused on the committee. They were still watching the replays, still sharing the quote, truth requires no drama, only light. And across homes, schools, churches, and cities, a single quiet realization took root. Something had shifted, not just in the headlines, but in the heart of a nation. Thunder rolled over Washington that night, not metaphorically, but in truth, as lightning arced across the Capitol dome. Reporters, some veterans of decades in D.C., confessed they'd never felt such profound institutional trembling. Something had shifted, not just in government, but in the very air. Across the country, sleep eluded millions. People sat in silence, reflecting, not out of fear, but recognition. Truth, long maligned as fragile, had proven immovable. As dawn painted the Potomac gold, life continued. But for Senator John Leguizamo, the light brought no warmth. He sat alone in his modest townhouse kitchen, a cold cup of coffee untouched beside him. The television was on but muted. The headline was deafening all the same. Ethics Committee convenes. Resignation increasingly likely. Across the table, framed photographs of his family looked back at him, smiling, full of promise, now juxtaposed against the swirling shame of public disgrace. At the White House, there was no celebration. President Trump called Jonathan Roumie into the Oval Office. No press, no cameras, no victory optics. Pride brings nations to ruin, the president said quietly. But humility conquers hearts. I'm proud of how you handled this, son. Roumie didn't speak. He simply nodded, eyes steady, but weighted with the emotional weight of what had just passed. Outside, citizens had begun gathering again. In daylight now, some held candles, some prayed quietly for Leguizamo's family. Others sang America the Beautiful, not as partisans, but as neighbors. Reporters noticed something striking. There was no gloating, no chance of victory, only silence and hope. Inside the Capitol, the hearing room brimmed with tension. Senator Landry, chair of the Ethics Committee, began with calm gravitas. "Our duty today is not revenge," she declared. "It is restoration." Each committee member received sealed documents, carefully compiled by Vice President Roumie's team, quietly damning, painfully real. Backstage, Leguizamo paced, his shirt wrinkled, his breath shallow. "You have one path left," his lawyer whispered. "The truth, all of it." And so, when the doors opened, he stepped forward. Every lens turned, every senator stared. The floor beneath his feet felt impossibly hard. He stood alone and began to speak. "I have profoundly disappointed those who placed their trust in me." A hush fell over the room. "Yes, the donations happened exactly as described. Yes, I ignored warnings. I chased power and abandoned my values." The words came haltingly, but each struck with the weight of confession. From the gallery, his family sat holding tissues, silent, pale, still present. "To them," he said, voice cracking, "I offer my deepest apology. My shame is now public, but their pain is private, and I have caused both." He turned toward Roumie, seated beside the Senate's president pro tempore, poised, serene. "Mr. Vice President, you gave me something I no longer deserved, a chance to face myself. I won't forget that." Roumie stood, said nothing, simply placed his hand on his heart. It was enough. Then came the moment. "I hereby resign my seat in the United States Senate, effective immediately." There was no cheering, only quiet weeping. From both sides of the aisle, legislators embraced across party lines. Online forums flooded, not with mockery, but with stunned reverence. "This feels holy," one user posted. "This is what healing looks like." Outside, gentle rain began falling. Soft, warm, cleansing. Leguizamo emerged with bowed head. No escort, no limousine, just steps, marble, rain, and the weight of consequence. He walked alone into the drizzle, eyes fixed on nothing but the ground. From a distant window, Jonathan Roumie watched. No satisfaction filled him, no pride, only a single thought. This wasn't a political victory. This was a national reckoning. And now, the real work begins. That evening, back in his modest office, he returned to what mattered most. His wife Usha stood waiting, their youngest daughter in her arms. No words were needed. She simply smiled. He exhaled. And in that moment, amid the quiet hum of a city forever changed, Jonathan Roumie held his family close. Not as a politician, not even as a victor, but as a man who reminded a nation what truth, spoken without hatred, could still accomplish. "You didn't destroy him," she said quietly, watching her husband with perceptive eyes. "You gave him space for his humanity to return." Jonathan Roumie knelt down beside his daughter, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered, This is what public service is supposed to mean." That night, his prayers were longer, not because of triumph, but because of awe. Across America, something unexplainable stirred, a collective stillness, a fragile, unfamiliar peace. The thunder had passed, but its resonance, healing, quiet, real, had only just begun. In Bakersfield, an elderly woman named Maria, who had once campaigned for Leguizamo, opened her Bible with tearful eyes. "Maybe truth still matters," she whispered aloud. In Nashville, a teenager with no history of political interest posted a TikTok clip of Roumie's words. "Leadership requires truth, regardless of cost." The video soared past 3 million likes by dawn. In Des Moines, a retired Marine bought breakfast for a single mother. "Because of the example JD set," he explained simply. At a college in San Francisco, progressive students replayed the debate. One, usually loud in opposition, spoke softly. "I don't agree with all his views, but every word he said felt real." This wasn't about policy, it was about something deeper, something people feared they'd lost forever. The example of integrity, from hospital workers to janitors, judges to middle school teachers. Americans responded not with slogans, but tears. The next morning, Roumie's staff found an envelope under his office door. No return address, just a handwritten letter. It was from John Leguizamo. The handwriting shook with emotion. "Mr. Vice President, thank you for creating space for ethical accountability. I've lived in fear of losing my position, of facing myself. That night, Your words broke my prison. My children looked at me, not with shame, but with grace. You didn't defeat me, you restored me, and I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the rediscovery of the man I was meant to be." Roumie stood for several minutes motionless, then carefully folded the letter. He didn't frame it, he placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but a reminder. True leadership, he knew, isn't about spectacle. It's about quiet consistency, truth lived out when no one's watching. The man once criticized for being too calm had reshaped a nation with one sentence. Outside, the American flag fluttered gently in soft wind, not stormy, not defiant, just steady. Television hosts choked on their words, caught off guard by emotion. One morning show anchor whispered, "It's been years since politics made me feel anything other than anger." At a high school in Georgia, a student raised his hand during civics class. "Why don't more leaders talk like him?" And in Nebraska, a farmer who hadn't voted in a decade walked into a diner and declared, "I think I might believe again." Jonathan Roumie gave no press conference, no post-debate tour, no self-congratulation. He returned to work, one policy briefing at a time. Wherever he appeared, people rose, not to cheer, but to honor. Hands over hearts, no chanting, just recognition. Because sometimes the greatest victories in history are not shouted. They are whispered, in truth, in grace, in unshakable conviction. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it fade. Comment, truth, like this video. Subscribe for more stories that actually matter. You felt what you felt for a reason. Now share it, so someone else can remember what truth sounds like. God bless you, and God bless America.